Have a good meeting. I'm going to go ahead and
Thank
hide
you.
myself. Great. See the red dot. Super cool. Super cool. Hide self view. Come here. All right.
Hi, Carrie. Hi, Jake.
Hello.
Long time no see, Carrie. And Jake.
We set a record finance subcommittee meeting, 17 minutes.
Wow.
I dare you to beat that, Christina.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah.
Meeting over.
We will conclude at 6:14 p.m.
A good portion of that is because I did not speak during the meeting. So that did not hurt the
You
speed.
spoke. That's actually not true. You did speak.
Now, in all fairness, we our business administrator was otherwise occupied with a very important task on behalf of the district, which I'm sure you will hear about later. So I'll keep it a mystery. Until then.
You don't want to steal Joe's thunder.
No, not at all.
Thunder thief.
Steve. So we're just waiting for Jose and then we can get going. Hi, Curtis.
Hello. Hello.
Hello.
All I heard was thunder.
Oh,
All you need to hear.
I told Carrie she couldn't steal your thunder about what your task was this afternoon.
I said you were on a special mission, so our finance subcommittee meeting was all of 17 minutes long.
We
Continue.
we got our first big batch of tests over to the college for the courier just in time.
Job.
No speeding, right?
Okay, it's 6 o'clock and everyone's here, so I think we can get going. I just want to see if I can, I don't know if you guys are hearing that.
Christina, I'm not hearing that, but Steve isn't here. Oh, yes, he is. Sorry, my bad.
He's here, yeah.
I'm here.
There's a ding happening every time somebody pops in and it's really
But
weird.
that's on your settings. So if you go to the, I think it's participants, maybe?
It's not in there.
I gotta turn that off now.
Oh, well. Okay, let's just get going. Welcome to the Mount Greylock Regional School District School Committee. I would like to call this meeting to order. It is Thursday, February 25th, 2021. It is 6:01 p.m. We are meeting remotely via Zoom per Governor Baker's order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, MGLC 30A, Section 20. The public will not be allowed to physically access the school committee meeting. At Mount Greylock Regional School District, our mission is to create a community of learners working together in a safe and challenging learning environment that encourages restorative-based processes, respect, inclusive diversity, courtesy, integrity, and responsibility through high expectations and cooperation, resulting in lifelong learning and personal growth. Next up on our agenda is public comment. We currently do not have anyone signed up for public comment. So we will move on to our next agenda item, which is approval of minutes, February 11th, 2021. Do I have a motion to approve the February 11th, 2021 minutes?
So moved.
Curtis moves. Do I have a second?
Second.
Was that Julia?
Yes, sorry, that was me.
Thank you. Julia seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Bowen, aye.
Conry, aye.
Constantine, I.
Elfenbein, aye.
Green eye.
Johnson, aye.
Miller, aye.
Thank you. That motion passes. Next up is the school choice discussion, and I will turn this over to Jake.
Thank you, Christina. I hope everybody's well. I'm going to kind of blend the school choice discussion and the tuition agreement conversation into one presentation. I hope that's okay with everybody. I've made some minor tweaks to this presentation since it was sent out to you as a link. So, and for some of you, this presentation is likely to be really a rehash of things that you have known for years in your service to the school committee. So really, I do this for anybody in the community who's on the Zoom or perhaps watching on WillyNet, or will watch this on YouTube later on, just to make sure that everybody in the community knows what we're talking about when we talk about tuition agreements, when we talk about school choice, and how we approach both of those situations. So I am just going to share my screen here for a minute. Let me get the right. Are you seeing the presentation, tuition and school choice? Thank you for the big nods and the thumbs up. I appreciate that. It's only 7 or 8 slides, just really looking at tuition and school choice, some legal context for both of these items and how they impact us here in the Mount Greylock Regional School District. And then really some final thoughts. Tonight is going to be light on what you're not going to get is a recommendation on a grade by grade, section by section, school by school basis for how many slots we have open. We're simply not there yet, but you'll certainly get where I'm coming from as I consider school choice as a school leader. So I'm not going to read all of this to you, so please don't anybody panic when you see the wordiness of this. It's in Mass General Law that every community in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts owes the children that live in that community a free and appropriate public education. In terms of high schools, lots and lots of communities don't have high schools, but there are some pretty fine point laws that govern what has to happen for communities that do not have high schools or are not a part of a regional school district. And if a
Jake, I think you froze.
Maybe he's just taking a really deep breath.
Yeah. It looks
You
like,
know, Joe was a little glitchy earlier too. Are they both at school?
yeah, I think so.
That's concerning.
Yeah, I think they're both frozen. Because Joe looks really worried permanently too.
Now I gotta see.
Oh, sigh.
Oh, we lost
Now
them
they're both gone, right?
Yeah, they'll try to log back in.
Sorry about the delay, and they are pretty much everything on the agenda, so we really need them.
It's going to make it hard to have a 14-minute meeting this way.
Or
We're
really,
halfway there.
Or maybe it's only a 7-minute meeting.
I apologize. I'm having issues with my desktop computer, so I've moved to a laptop. And I think I can pick up. So for anybody that was hoping we would break the land speed record, I apologize. But I will try to pick up where I left off. Christina, I think you might need to make me
A host again.
yeah. provide for the education of your students. Students that are non-operative or that provide elementary only also have to provide middle and high school experiences for their students. And in Massachusetts, that can be done in 3 ways: in neighboring communities, the way we do it with our neighbors, in neighboring states, and there are certainly communities that engage in that work. And a third option is to have an agreement with independent schools, including boarding schools, if that's actually necessary. I think that's very rare or non-existent in Massachusetts right now. There's certainly some other communities in New England where that is indeed the case. Failure for a town to reach an agreement with a neighboring town that does have the particular level of school for which the first town is looking, failure to reach that agreement means that the state will step in and force an agreement. And as you all know, we do have formal, very good, and I imagine hard sought written agreements with our neighboring communities of Hancock and New Ashford. And I say that those were hard sought. These agreements are tricky subjects. There's real financial issues at stake. There are issues related to what it means for the taxpayers in the sending town and in the receiving town. And so yeah, I'm very grateful for the folks that came before some of us to execute those agreements. Tuition agreements. So we do, as I said, have tuition agreements with New Ashford and Hancock, Mass. To attend Lanesboro Elementary School and the Mount Greylock Regional School. These agreements, just in general, in the box on the right-hand side of the screen, they are generally based, and ours is, on per pupil expenditures minus transportation costs, which the towns pay themselves, and special education per pupil costs, which are likewise borne by the sending towns. For this current school year, the tuition that is charged both to New Ashford and to Hancock for both Lanesboro and the Mount Greylock School is $15,249 per student. And then the towns pay additional special education upticks where that is legally and ethically and morally necessary. And those 2 towns bear their own transportation expenses. The 21-22 number is yet to be determined because we do not have certified per pupil numbers back from the state yet. The state, like all of the rest of us, is a little behind in certain pieces related to finance. So we will be bringing those numbers forward and sharing those with our colleagues and neighbors in New Ashford and Hancock as soon as we get it. For next school year, we anticipate that Hancock will have 31 students at Mount Greylock. New Ashford will have 6 students at the Lanesboro Elementary School and 11 students at Mount Greylock. Sending towns, per our agreement, are required to pay 100% of special education costs for students on IEPs and 100% of costs associated with 504 plans that require services above and beyond what we would normally provide to all of our students or have easily on hand. Sending towns do carry the cost of any out of the regional school district programming and transportation costs. For instance, if a student requires a day program in another town to meet their legally required needs, or if they require a residential program, those costs and the transportation are if there is sorry, is my internet not working again?
Yeah, it's being
It went
very,
in and out.
Okay, I apologize, folks. Did you catch most of what I said on this tuition agreement slide?
yes.
Okay. Yeah, just give me a heads up, or Christina, send me a text if it gets too bad, and I'll just restart and we'll try plan B
You got it.
or plan C at this point. if a student were to have a change in placement due to a special education plan mid-year, then we would simply refund the sending town, a prorated amount for the part of the year that the student was not actually with us. Our particular agreements for this upcoming year renew automatically as of March 1st. I've had a couple of conversations with the superintendent that covers Hancock and New Ashford, and we feel that those agreements will just be allowed to automatically renew. And it's not in our agreement, but it is in Mass General Law that costs associated with students going to a vocational school and the transportation to get to that school are covered by the sending town. Now, moving on to school choice as I try to work through this. Again, this is just a page from our policy manual, which is available on our website and at the Massachusetts Association of School Committees website. Again, I'm not going to read this to you. This policy essentially just brings down to a local level what the legal references at the bottom of the page and the Board of Education requires by us per their regulations. The school choice process is probably a piece that some people are aware of, some people are not aware of. Again, this is from the Mass General Law. I will, in the box, have encapsulated what this means to us locally. The district, our regional school district, provides for 2 random selections for open school choice slots per year. The first random selection, lottery, if you will, happens between the last week of school and July 1st. So that's the first round. And then there is another round that I believe in law has to be prior to November 1st, but by tradition and by policy here in the Mount Greylock Regional School District happens the week prior to school opening if there are available slots. Obviously, we are not allowed to discriminate in any way, shape, or form, including school choice. If there is discrimination involved in for any reason, for any protected individual or group, that becomes a Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination issue, and it's a serious issue. Receiving districts, in this case, that's us, report back to the sending district and to the Commonwealth who the school choice students are for the upcoming year. And siblings of students who are already enrolled in the school district via school choice do receive priority placement for school choice openings. It's not in anybody's best interest to create more challenges for families that are trying to join us to educate their children here. Well, and now my lights went out. I'm having a banner evening here, folks. I apologize again. School choice in the real world. School choice was adopted in the Commonwealth as part of a vast collection of laws known as the Ed Reform Acts of 1993. A district may choose not to participate in school choice. Now, what that means is that your district cannot receive school choice students. All families have a right to attempt to choice out of a district. So a vote to continue in the school choice program is actually a vote to receive students. We have no say in our ability to send students. Mount Greylock and the 2 member towns prior to regionalization are long-term participants in the Commonwealth school choice program. Couple of key things, just again, this is mostly for community members or for folks for whom this is new information. Once a student is accepted via school choice, that student, it's essentially as though that student has moved into our community. Once they get a yes from us, they have a right to graduate from our school system. So, why that's important, A, it's a peace of mind for a family that makes that choice, but B, and organizationally, it's important to understand that the choices we make at the elementary level will ultimately impact class sizes, program availability, other things at the middle and high school. no transportation is provided via the school choice program. So families and guardians do have to provide their own transportation. There was a time, once upon a time, where the state, where there was a mechanism for families to be reimbursed for transportation. That is no longer the case. And then the final bullet under the key points for school choice at work. In general, school choice student tuition is $5,000. It's a few $1,000s higher for approved Commonwealth virtual schools. But in essence, when we say yes to a student, the town from which that student is coming, in essence, writes a check to Mount Greylock Regional Schools for $5,000 for accepting that student. So again, school choice at work in the real world. And I think everybody understands this, but I really want to make the point, because in some communities, this is a really, really hot topic. School choice ideally was founded on several principles, one of which is that choice and competition will organically improve the quality of education. Not saying I agree with these things necessarily. These are just some of the founding precepts. Another precept is that some families, because of their financial position, have many choices for where their kids go to school. They can afford a house in almost any community, or they could send their child to a parochial or independent school. And so school choice really leveled the playing field for allowing, all schools in the Commonwealth to hypothetically be open to all kids. And then a third precept, and there's several more, but I won't bore you all with them. A third precept is that school choice should be used to fill gaps. There are communities where this is an ongoing, pretty heated argument. Is school choice ideally to be used to add complete sections, or to add, rather than 2 kindergarten classes, we have 4 because 2 of them are school choice. Ideally, the folks who came up with this notion of school choice in the Commonwealth felt that it should work just the way you see here on the screen, that you have a classroom full of students, you have a teacher, and you have space within that class. And so that empty space could potentially be filled by a school choice student. The way I would suggest that we think about this is that school choice allows districts to fill in empty seats. It starts to get to be a slippery slope when you shy away from these bullet points. You don't necessarily want to use school choice if it's adding labor costs, paraprofessionals, teachers. You do not want to add administrative costs, or the numbers that you're taking in such that you need to add administrative overhead to your organization. You do not want numbers to drive facilities or utilities cost by way of needing to, buy new furniture every year or do an addition to your school or something like that. And I think really this last bullet kind of encapsulates what my philosophy around this would be. You cannot negatively impact the organization as a whole, or the operation of an existing classroom, getting down to the heart of everything we do, which is kids and grown-ups in classrooms. You can't negatively impact the organization of the district, a classroom, a class section, or the orderly and effective operation of the school through school choice. So the local impacts of school choice, this is simply a screenshot of a slide from an Excel document that you can download at the web address that's at the bottom of the screen. If you just Google Massachusetts or search Massachusetts School Choice Program, it will take you to the DESE school finance page. You can click school choice on the left side of this page, and you can see this type of information year after year on every single school district in the Commonwealth. So Mount Greylock Regional School District in the former variations of the school district have historically approached school choice as a reasonable means of filling empty seats, as I described in the last slide. Historically, the approach has been, again, not to impact individual classrooms or schools negatively. So, again, to reiterate the guiding thoughts as we bring some very specific recommendations to you in March, school choice should never push the boundaries of class size overload. That's simply not why school choice was created. It is not fair to the kids that live in the community where the receiving school is housed. And so that's a pretty basic precept. We owe Lanesboro and Williamstown residents active and honored stewardship of the investments that they make in their school, meaning that people choose to live in Lanesboro, people choose to live in Williamstown for a reason. And we owe it to them to make sure that their children are being served first and foremost through our schools, and then our tuition agreement students. And then we look at school choice as a way to help supplement classrooms, but certainly not to drive overcrowding or anything that would impact Williamstown, Lanesboro, or tuitioned-in students. In my opinion, it's preferable to accept students in kindergarten and first grade and have them be long-term members of your community. I won't go into it in too much detail, but there's lots of reasons why a family might choose the school choice in a later grade, including high school grades. I think a district is wise to look at primarily, let's look at this as a potential 10 or 11 or 12 or even 13-year relationship. And that's look hardest at our open seats in the early grades. Siblings do have to receive priority preference. That's just fair. We know that balancing work and family and education and everything else is a really hard task on the easiest of days. And so creating scenarios where a family is having to go to 2 different towns or may have to consider going to 2 different towns to educate their children, we don't want to be involved in that. That is not family friendly. This past school year, actually the school year that we're in right now, so I guess it's the current school year, for most districts, this was a year to really tap the brakes on school choice. I know in my former district, we accepted almost no new school choice incoming students over the course of this school year. I believe this district accepted a smaller number than it generally does for this current school year. Wisely so, because there's so many unknowns at the beginning of this school year, and there's so many unknowns as we head out of February and into March. And so as we think about our students, hopefully starting to return to school as normal much sooner rather than later, that notion of protecting class sizes next year, as we're trying to make sure that this year or 16 or however many months of schooling during a pandemic, that we can fill the gaps that were created or make our best effort to fill the gaps that were created for all students. I think this year, more so than any year in the past, is a year to protect class sizes as much as we can. And in March, we will be bringing back school by school, grade by grade recommendations for your approval for school choice, so that we can report to the state, here's the school, here's the grades that have openings, and here's how many openings that school has in each grade. And we will do that for all 3 schools. In March, we will also ask for a general agreement that yes, we will continue to participate in school choice. We will ask, as I just said, for the school by school, grade by grade approval. And this will allow us to proceed with the 2 levels of process, those 2 random lotteries, one at the end of the school year, one right before school starts, to follow our district policy to admit new school choice students. Take you back to a couple of months ago when we were talking about the Berkshire County Regional Planning Commission's 10-year look ahead to number of students that are going to be in each school district. Again, and we'll circle back to that document on an annual basis, and probably at several key points during each school year that we're working together. You know, I think it's pretty obvious how school choice and the growth or lack of growth in our neighbors, the tuition students to us, really will in some ways have a different looking impact and maybe new impacts as we move forward into time, if these numbers that you can see on the left hand of the screen from the Berkshire Regional Planning Commission hold up. That hypothetically speaking, if we believe these numbers, and I tend to believe these numbers because the past numbers would bear out that they're worth believing, we will potentially have more and more available slots as time goes on. And we need to be thoughtful and strategic about how we make use of that. And so I, at some point during this, lost my ability to actually see you while I was presenting. So I apologize. That's what happens when you use like an 8-year-old laptop, which is what I'm doing this on as Plan B. I hope I didn't miss somebody waving frantically or having a deep question, but I'm happy to switch back and forth between the presentation and this if people do have specific questions. Really just wanted to give you an overview and certainly give the folks that pay the bills out in our community an overview of what we're actually talking about when we're discussing school choice and when we're discussing tuition agreements, and that these two things are very different items that we're talking about, but they're both very important items. You know, they're important financially, but they also impact, you know, our own students that reside in our district, also impacts their educational experience. So I thank you for having the patience to let me take some time to walk through this evening. Carrie?
Jake, I know you said that we're going to talk about particulars next month, but I wonder if you know at this point what percentage of our student population in the various schools is tuition and choice.
Let me, I don't have that right in front of me, Carrie, but I can tell you, so we have, you know, a little under 1,100 students this year. I believe this year, like in the neighborhood of 35, 36 of those students are tuition students. And according to DESE, about 81 or 82 of those students are school choice students. So, you know, it could, in a given year, it could be, those students could comprise 10%, 10, 12, 13% of our entire student body.
Right. Okay. And related to that, do we know how many students choice out of our district?
We do. Again, let me pull that up quickly, Carrie. In the 20 school year, we had, and I don't have this year's numbers right in front of me. I apologize for that because I should. In 2020, so that's the school year that ended in in June of 20. There were 83 students choicing in and 45 choicing out. It seems like that looks to me, if you go back through slide number 9, you can see the ins and outs every year. That seems like proportionally a year where it was getting closer and closer. In general, the number of students coming in is about 2/3, of the number of students that are going out. So if we have 10 students going out, we're bringing in, 30. That last year was about as close of the bars lining up, and it was still about a 35 student differential between coming in and going out.
And I don't know if you saw Christina's message, but she lost her internet. She's trying to get back.
It was a rough night.
It is a rough night. It's the
Thank you. Julia?
Maybe not in this meeting, but in a future meeting, I would be interested in understanding why we lose students. That's a different way to think about our student population.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, that's always I have a lot of experience in doing that kind of work. So we can definitely look into ways to do that. Jose?
Thanks, Jake. I'll speak for myself here, but I suspect some of us might have learned a lot. I certainly learned a lot from your presentation, so I appreciate it.
Thank you.
The question I have is just a basic one, and it's I'm just curious about where funds end up going and how funds end up getting used by the district, both in terms of tuition students as well as the school choice students. Where does that money go, and how does that money get used?
Yeah, I'm going to put Joe a little bit on the spot here and ask him to talk about that, because I think he will speak with a little more authority than I can, if that's okay, Jose. Thanks, Joe.
Sure. So I actually missed the beginning part of the question. Where do we use school choice funds and where do we use
tuition funds?
So school choice and tuition funds are both restricted in terms of the ways that we can use them. In both cases, we need to use them for educational purposes. So we couldn't go off and buy a building with school choice or tuition funds. And in terms of our ability to revolve them from year to year, unlike some other grant funding, we are able to receive those funds and then save them to use in a later year. So those are the two overarching principles. In terms of how we tend to use them annually, school choice and tuition tend to help fund a portion of our teacher educator salaries. Those funds are consistent enough in terms of revenue that they aren't the type of funds that dry up from one year to the next. And choice and tuition funds are also often used for things like educational technology purposes, purchases and things like that. Was that answering your question, or?
Yeah, that was great, Joe. That was perfect. The maybe just a quick follow-up, and I'm not sure if this is something that we can answer right now, but in terms of a percentage of our budget, because you said the tuition school choice funds end up supporting teacher salaries, and what is, in terms of proportions, what are we talking about? How much, in essence, the big question is, how much do we depend on school choice funds and tuition funds to support our budget?
Let me give you a fairly accurate number here in a second. I've just got too many tabs open, which is a plague. So in a given year, we typically spend between $800,000 and $950,000 in regular tuition income. So that's tuition coming from tuitioning in towns. And in terms of choice, we typically spend $500,000 to $600,000. Now that's on let's use our current year budget, about a $23 million operating budget. That does not include capital, so paying down the new Mount Greylock building. So that's an overview if you want. I mean, it's roughly $1 in $23 that we spend, $1 in $22 is coming from tuition, and then a little bit less than that in terms of choice.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. Thanks.
I don't know if there's any more questions. We will be getting into the weeds more on available spaces and hope to have the per pupil from the state, although we're not exactly sure when we're going to get that. We know we need to give Hancock and New Ashford a heads up. Looking at that from year to year, it does not vary. It's not a large dollar swing and it's not a large percentage swing. So, but please know we continue to work on that and we'll move forward as soon as we get the data from the Commonwealth. So thank you. For those of you who already knew all this stuff, thanks for bearing with us. For those of you for whom it's new, if there's any further questions, feel free to reach out to me one-on-one and we can walk through any of that. So thank you.
Thank you, Jake. So that was school choice discussion and tuition agreement agenda items sort of hand in hand. So we'll move
I mean,
on.
if there are specific questions about the tuition agreements, you have them in your packets. We're certainly happy to discuss any and all pieces of that. I just thought it would be just maybe easier to think about by looking at it all as students that come here from towns other than Lanesboro and Williamstown and how they wind up here via tuition or school choice. So I think I covered the highlights of it, Christina, but certainly if there's specific questions about the agreements, we're happy to discuss those.
This is Steve. Just one question on the tuition agreements. Apologies if you already said that. I just want to get this in the minutes for completeness. A lot of people did a tremendous amount of work in the past in the negotiations between the towns. And I believe the understanding now is that these agreements will be renewed automatically each year unless a town says otherwise. Is that correct?
There is language in each agreement that suggests that does say that it carries on to the following year unless either party is opted out. That's a quote. Either party is opted out by March 1st. And so we started this conversation with our neighbor superintendent in January, and thus far have the go-ahead and did not anticipate any opt-out prior to March 1st. I do think though, Steve, that's a good question. The language in the agreement I think we could tighten up the language, and we'll talk to Adam Duperret about doing so to just really clarify that is indeed the case. It sort of carries through right now through 2021, through March 1st of 2021. We will double check and make sure that is the case carrying through upcoming fiscal years as well.
Perfect, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I don't see any other questions, so we can move on to the next agenda item, which is substitute rates.
Yeah, thank you. You also have this in your packet. We just, interestingly enough, one of the first things we looked at when I got here, because we were concerned about the availability of substitute teachers, given the challenges of the school year that we're in. We did a countywide comparison of substitute rates, and our substitute rates, and Christina, I'm happy to read these off if you would like to, for the public record, but our substitute rates are really at or above the rest of Berkshire County, the folks we would, for lack of a better term, be in competition with. A certified educator with licensure from DESE is $100 per day for a day-by-day substitute. A college degree, either a 2-year degree or a 4-year degree, is $90 per day. And a high school diploma or an equivalent high school diploma is $80 a day. are rates for school nurses, and they must be a licensed registered nurse or a licensed practical nurse with CPR certification, is $160 per day. For our custodial folks and our cafeteria team, they are paid at the hourly step 1 rate in the current collective bargaining agreement. And for long-term substitutes, and this is a long-term substitute for folks at home, the school committee members have this. That rate applies when a substitute fills in continuously for the same faculty member for a period exceeding 10 days. So you become a long-term substitute really on day 11. And those teachers are paid $220 per day, which aligns fairly closely with step 1 of a bachelor's degree on the teacher's salary schedule in the collective bargaining agreement. And then for paraprofessionals, because we do utilize paraprofessional substitutes as well, that is the step 1 hourly rate that's contained within the collective bargaining agreement. So, you know, I
This time it's not me.
any of our public school counterparts in Berkshire County. That's actually a good thing. Sorry, am I coming in and out?
Yes.
Okay.
A little bit.
Can you just start that sentence again?
Yeah, I would be hard pressed to say that we are behind any of our Berkshire County neighboring school districts, and we're likely. Although I don't have the assessment that we did right in front of me, we're ahead in a couple of places, not by hundreds of dollars, maybe not even by tens of dollars, but we're ahead in strategic places. I think our daily nurse rate is probably among the leaders in the county, which is good. That's the health of children. So, you know, this is something that administratively we will look at every year, or as needs require us, or our data is suggesting to us that we need to go back and take a look at this.
Julia has a question.
I think you just answered it, but are you saying the market is clearing? Like you have subs when you need subs?
Boy. For the most part, yes. Michelle?
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's shocking.
Yeah, I would say I don't think during a pandemic year when substitute teachers are having to be accountable for knowing Zoom, I don't think this is the year to make that determination. I do know the reason we looked at it as soon as I got here in November was because we were struggling to get substitutes in. And I can tell you that is a common, it's a common topic of conversation among the superintendents, that it's really difficult to find substitute teachers. It's really, really difficult to find substitute paraprofessionals. So now, Julia, the embedded within that question, so there is a question of every time we need a sub, can we easily get a sub? I think the answer to that would have to be no. I can't speak to that during good times here, during regular times, let alone good times. The second piece of that is it because do we need to raise by 10 or 20 or 25 or $30? That one's a little tougher to answer. I don't know that it's really a matter of dollars at the end of the day, but we can work to figure that out.
Maybe related, and do any of the schools have in-house subs that are just full-time ready to jump in if needed?
No. We and I would be of really mixed thoughts on that, on what that how that investment pays off, having looked at that every single year for the last 7 years. But the answer to that question is no.
Mhm.
And just for those of you that might not be familiar with that notion, there are school districts, there are schools that have, some sort of a variation of what you would call a full-time substitute. And generally, they are on the somewhere on the teacher's salary schedule. They would very likely be a member of the collective bargaining agreement. And so you would have somebody who's really, when they report in the morning, they check in the office and find out where they're actually, which classroom they're actually going to report to. My personal experience with that has been many buildings, you think of a building the size of Mount Greylock, the population wise, the size of Williamstown Elementary population wise, you might really need 2 or 3 full-time substitutes in order to make that work, which might become financially just not really that sustainable or efficient.
Okay, do we have any other questions there before we move on to the next agenda item? Okay, so next up on the agenda is fiscal year 2022 budget apportionment discussion.
Yes, and this is on me. And unfortunately, I have not made as much headway with this as I would like. So I do not have a glossy presentation to provide you. What we do know so far is that our Chapter 70 funds are pretty much holding steady in the governor's proposal, which are the current numbers that we have. So they're not going up, but they're also not going down. In terms of Chapter 71, regional transportation funding, that currently is seeing a drop of $70,000 off of the 390 that it is this year. So that's a number that that we did not expect to see decrease the way it has. But it's also a number that tends to change significantly as the legislature takes it through and typically finds more funds to tuck into it. So that's another component of the overall budget. In terms of grant funding, that it's an area where we're kind of staring down a very rosy picture, but without a lot of information. In terms of, we know that we have worked with both ESSER and CVRF funds this year. Those are 2 types of coronavirus relief funds that come from the federal government and are administered by the states or apportioned by the state. That's a source of funds where with the new administration, with the look that they are, or the way they're portraying their willingness to fund and to really pour money into education in the coming year, we keep on hearing that we're going to see multiples of our current levels of funding within those 2 areas as we look into FY22. We do not have anything concrete yet. So if it's multiples, we'd be looking at moving from about $400,000 in aid up to $1 million in aid. Now, that's something where the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education continues to say, hold tight, folks, the funding's coming. We are seeing those discussions happen, and we are preparing to dole those funds out appropriately to all of you, but we do not have concrete information on it yet, which is a little bit disconcerting when we're looking at an FY22 where ideally we will begin to fund more programming that allows us to have more contact time, as well as richer programming available across the board. So those funds are ones that are really going to shape the way we think about how we then need to tap into the other source of funds before we talk about apportioning to our 2 towns, which would be our use of school choice, our use of tuition. revolving funds that we have where the district has done a fantastic job over the years of always underestimating revenue and then making sure that it was saving for the rainy days that were ahead. And so that's something where, as we look at our tuition and choice balances, they continue to be very healthy in a way that can allow us to smooth out the impact of additional programming that's needed while state funding lags behind. So Chapter 70, Chapter 71 type funding lagging behind, without creating an additional burden on our towns. And our towns, from our initial discussions with them, their financial pictures are more positive than anybody would have thought as they look at their revenues going into or going through this year. However, we are definitely not through the worst of this pandemic from a financial perspective in many ways. And so a lot of people are really battening down the hatches and trying to make sure that they're prepared for what could be a much longer winter than the one we're currently experiencing financially. So all of those things then feed into apportionment calculations. And our apportionment calculations are based on really three big factors. One is the state's indication of each of our towns' ability to pay. So how much does the state declare Lanesboro should pay for education at a minimum? And how much should Williamstown pay for education at a minimum? And those figures are called the minimum local contributions. Those minimum local contributions that the state declares each town must provide at a minimum to its regional school district have tended to hold fairly steady over the years. I mean, gradual increases, but holding fairly steady relative between the two towns. And that's something where the preliminary numbers that we're seeing continue to paint that same picture. So that's part one of apportionment, minimum local contribution as required from each of our two towns. The second component is foundation enrollment. Foundation enrollment that each of the towns sends to the elementary schools, and then also its share of students to Mount Greylock Regional School. Now, those are numbers that this year we have seen a shock to the system in that our October 1 numbers, so backing up a little bit, I think we've talked about this in the past, but typically a lot of the figures that we see out of the state, our various forms of aid, as well as our own internal calculations of how to apportion things, come out of the state requesting that we take a snapshot as of October 1 of enrollment across the board. And so we report enrollment based on October 1 figures. And so our October 1 numbers this year show us down in a number of areas in a way that we are not accustomed to, and not triggered solely by attrition or gradually decreasing enrollment as the older grades are larger and the younger grades are smaller. So that's something that we're trying to take into account and try to make sure we've got understood as best we can. And then the final thing is the equalized valuations of the two towns. The state does calculations based on property values across a variety of sectors within each town, residential and commercial, and then comes up with equalized valuations to provide. The most recent numbers did come out the middle of last year, and they showed a fairly steady relationship between the two towns. So in those ways, minimum local contribution, equalized valuations, those are factors that are holding fairly steady in terms of the relationship to the two towns and how they share in costs across the board. The foundation enrollment picture is one that is showing a little bit of a change from past years, and we're just trying to make sure that we've got that all taken into account in the various ways that the state is using that, or in some situations they're actually backing out of that right now and using the prior year numbers because they know that the current year numbers don't reflect what will probably be the case as we enter next year and hopefully in years to come. So there are a lot of moving parts, but at a certain point we're going to need to put some stakes in the ground and just try try to forge ahead, and that moment is coming up pretty soon. So we're just trying to hold tight, but also do the things that we can.
Carrie has a question.
Thanks, Christina. So we didn't get to talk about this at the Finance Committee meeting. I have a question about the, well, first of all, I think E&D is another part of the equation. So maybe you could touch on that. But going back to choice and tuition, it may be good to remind us or inform some of us how it works with the 2 elementary schools in the budget in terms of the regional agreement. And then my question is whether the choice and tuition is district-wide or whether it stays with the schools.
Okay. So the regional agreement is silent in terms of the specific way that we need to spend choice, tuition, and E&D. So for all 3 of those sources of funding, the regional agreement does not itself dictate how those funds are apportioned. The regional agreement only mandates how.
Sorry, Joe, apologies to interrupt. What could you define what E&D means for some of us? Sorry, apologies.
Sure, of course. Excess and deficiency. Excess and deficiency is a fund that builds up over time as we spend less than we are required to, or than we have appropriated. And that is a fund that, unlike tuition and choice, is capped at a certain percentage of our overall budget, and is reported on an annual basis, and something that is a way to shore up bumps from year to year. But it's also in some ways a more restricted fund in terms of how large of a fund we can build up. But it's less restricted in terms of the uses that we can have for those funds. So E&D, unlike school choice and tuition, could be used for purposes that are not purely educational in focus. So they could be used for telephone systems, or replacing doors, or things like that are not books and teachers and education technology.
Yes, sorry for the interruption, but thank you. Yeah.
So Carrie, regional agreement, it speaks to how Chapter 70 funds are expected to be apportioned between the schools, between the 3 schools. Our historical use within our relatively young pre-K through 12 regional school district has indicated that we attempt to make sure that tuition and choice funds are used where they are generated as best we can. So Lanesboro Elementary School and Mount Greylock are the 2 schools that have tuition agreements that bring revenue into them. Williamstown Elementary School has a more significant volume historically of choice funds that come in, and choice funds that are kept. But Lanesboro Elementary and Mount Greylock also have choice revenues. So as far as the state's concerned, and as far as our regional agreement is concerned, our use of those funds, meaning the school committee's deployment of those funds, is not restricted. I'm actually going to bring up the agreement right now just to make sure I'm refreshing my memory in terms of all the details of it, because I just want to.
Yeah, Joe, I think that's my understanding of it. My question around the regional agreement was, so thank you for actually responding also to the practice that we've had. So that's helpful. My question about the regional agreement was that it's not a standard regional agreement, in that all the expenses are district wide. The way, I mean, in a very simple way, it's set up so that we share the expenses of Mount Greylock in the two towns, but then each town essentially pays for the budget of its elementary school. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes.
Okay, so as we're putting the budget together, you know, we try to keep that in mind as well. Okay.
It looks like Jose might have a question. And
So
company.
my 3-year-old has just arrived in time for my question, so I'll just be brief because she's going to say hello to everyone. Just quickly, this is sort of a 2-part question, as you say. Yes. Sorry. This is good. Now she's got stage fright. Fiscal year. When does our fiscal year begin and end? And then the question I've got is I think it came up in a previous conversation at a school committee meeting about summer programming and whether we can, how should support students over the summer. Would that fall on this fiscal year, or could that be something that's budgeted on the following fiscal year? What might that look like if we pursue this?
So I'll speak to the fiscal year, and then I'll hand it off to Jake to speak to summer programming and later programming. The fiscal year is July 1 to the end of June. So this fiscal year that we are currently in, fiscal year 21, will end the last day of June 2021.
So given that answer, Jose, the last day of school ideally, I think, is June 20th. So give everybody kind of a break of that next week. Traditionally, summer programs in Massachusetts pick up after July 4. So you will see in the budget that we're presenting money for summer programming for this upcoming summer starting July 1. Does that make sense? We just got some early and teeny tiny guidance from Commissioner Riley yesterday on what the state's envisioning for summer programming. I think our local vision is maybe a little more comprehensive and expansive than the state. So you will be seeing that, because that summer programming would be starting within 4 or 5 days of our new fiscal year starting.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. Thanks, Jeff.
You're welcome.
Okay, do we have any other questions on that agenda item? Seeing none, we will move on to the next item, which is pooled COVID testing update.
I think that one's on me. So this week was our first week of student testing. It was awesome. I mean, I'm very happy to have survived it from my perspective. There's a lot of coordination. The amount of teamwork that went into trying to get 3 different buildings with probably seven or so different mechanisms for collecting specimens, ranging from teachers managing it within their own classroom, within their own class schedule, to students coming out in the hallway and having testing happen that way, to having it happen outside during mask breaks, to having scheduled time slots for staff so that they could come in at times when they were able, to having pull-up, drive-in type testing. I mean, we dove into a lot of different ways to try to make sure we could ramp up coverage as quickly as possible. And as of today, we have about 700 of our 1,100 to 1,200 students having consented, which is pretty great given the fact that it's really just week 1, and really good news coming out of today, especially. I spent a fair amount of the day in the buildings with students. It's amazing how empowering it is for a child to see that they just did something with something that's the size of a Q-tip. It has the power of identifying whether or not a virus is with them, so that they can take good care of themselves and of their friends and of their family. It's awesomely empowering. And the great news, like related to that, is every student that I saw today had a really positive experience and a really positive outlook for what this means. When you say testing, or when you say it's a test, I think everybody recoils a little bit. But the way our staff were able to work with our students and make it a part of the school day, make it so that it happened quickly, but also in a way that made it feel like we were doing something really positive for ourselves and for the community at large, is pretty awesome. And so I think that's a long-winded way of saying I think the participation rate will ramp up, because students who didn't participate will probably go home and talk about it, ask about it. We've only had a few reminders go out from each school in terms of getting parents to fill out the consent form, which is a required part of it. We can't just pull a student in because they say, yes, I'd like to do it. So we really need parents to go through that process of completing a form, submitting it, so that we can get students onto a participation list for it. So I think if there's one thing that I could call out, is that we're going to continue to remind parents, and we would love for them to allow their students to participate in this program. Tuesday and today were our 2 testing days this week. We tested students and staff on each of the 2 days, depending upon the school that you were in. The setup and the scheduling was varied a little bit. And next week, we will be testing Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. We've tried to map onto the same times or the same days of the week that the college has its courier service running to the laboratory in Cambridge, partly because the college has just been a great partner in this, and they've extended their help in terms of sharing that resource, that courier service with us, which is a huge help. The other side of it is we're trying to make sure that we get tests out into the lab so that we have the best chance possible of getting results in during the school week, as opposed to over the weekend, which creates more logistical hurdles if we need to do follow-ups. Speaking to the follow-ups, so far, we've had all negative test results, which is fantastic. So that's from our first week with staff only prior to break. And we received our results for Tuesday days testing late last night, and it was all negative for everybody who participated on Tuesday. So all of that's good news, but it's also normal. So I think the other message that's important to hear is that this is a screening program. It's testing people who have zero reason to believe that they have COVID. They're asymptomatic. They have not reported being close contacts. They're not quarantining for any reason. So some school districts that have piloted this program in the Boston area with prevalence that's much higher than ours in terms of COVID, they've gone over a month without a single positive case within their schools, which is great. But it also means you shouldn't fear the testing program as though it's going to start, popping up positives left and right. If we do get positives, chances are this week and next week, it's because people might have had COVID and they didn't know it, and they're still going to test positive for some period of time. Like we could get a little burst of them early on, but we'll be able to address those and know and provide information to the impacted individuals so that we can be able to move forward. So I think everything is exhaustingly peachy and good, and we really look forward to ramping it up further next week, Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday.
Thank you, Joe. It looks like Steve has a question. He has his hand up.
Yes, just to put some of the numbers in perspective, thank you. You said about 700 of the 1,100 kids have, signed up, but some of our students are fully remote. And I was wondering if you could tell us just how many students are fully remote. And the other thing, just on a personal note, both of my kids were tested today. It was a great experience for them. They were both very good about that and said it was very helpful for them to see what it's like. So I think it's going to be even better moving forward.
Part of the answer to your question is that we are trying to encourage participation of remote students and staff in the program. So remote students and staff are not necessarily excluded or should not be excluded from those numbers. Jake, I actually don't have a number handy for Mount Greylock. I think within the elementary schools right now, we're right about 60 across the 2 elementary schools that are fully remote. The Mount Greylock number tends to be a little bit more fluid because of the way the learning is set up there. The student movement between hybrid and remote has fluctuated more and more regularly.
Yeah, Mr. Schutz was good enough to text me around 70 students that would be fully remote from Mount Greylock, be considered for the most part fully remote at Mount Greylock, Joe. Thank you, Jake.
Steve,
Okay.
did that answer questions?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, and I was off. It's 68 across the 2 elementary schools. Nolan Pratt, principal, just texted me that. Spoke too quickly.
Thank you. Any other questions on the pool testing for Joe? Curtis.
I might end up just throwing a bunch of questions in an email to you, but I'm curious about the application process and the turnaround time, and like what body within the school was responsible for shepherding that through. And it's really fantastic. And having so many friends who teach in districts around the country who, when I told them about this, were stunned that there are schools that are able to do this right now. We're one of very few.
Curtis, if I may, and I'll keep this super quick, Joe, I promise you, the application process was arduous. The organization of it was a massive undertaking, and it was really Joe and our 3 school nurses and our school principals that, but really Joe and Nicole and Kathy and Carol, our school nurse team, just massive amount of work in rolling up their sleeves and digging in and making this possible. And now it's really a school community-wide effort to actually do it, make it work, keep kids and families, try to promote as much positive about it as we can. And it's a they do, and keep moving forward with business as usual. So sorry if I am freezing up again. The key thing I said is Joe and the 3 school nurses, Carol, Kathy, and Nicole, heroes.
Thank you.
Michelle has a question.
I don't actually have a question. I just have a statement. I just wanted to thank Joe because I know that took up many of your personal hours, and I wanted you to know that we appreciate it. We really do. I know you're going to say it was not you because that's how you are, but I know it was you, and I know it was the nurses, and I know it was the principals, and I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. But the nurses really, I mean, they have pulled out all the stops, and the staff, when we started to ask for participation from the staff are really excited about it. And this is yet another thing that we're asking our staff to figure out that is new and certainly not normal. And so it's been across all 3 buildings, it's been amazing. So
Does this make all of our staff non-COVID facing healthcare workers?
It's an interesting question.
I'm just saying.
I would need to look more closely at the definition of
That just came into my brain. I didn't actually plan to say that, but really, they're collecting specimens.
Curtis, did you want to say something? No. Okay.
Just, I was just going to point out that it's the first time I've ever heard anyone say, "I know it was you" in a positive way. So just take it.
Okay, I don't see any other questions, so I think we can move on to the next agenda item, which is Finance Subcommittee update. And I'm sure this is going to be a really long update. Right, Carrie?
1 second. Yes. No update. Thank you. You'll hear from us more next month.
Thank you, Carrie. Okay, so next up on our agenda are our next upcoming meetings. March 11th, there's a finance subcommittee meeting at 4 o'clock. And March 11th, we have the public hearing for the fiscal year 2022 budget, followed by our regular school committee meeting and those start at 6 p.m. Any questions or comments there? Carrie?
Joe, I'm wondering if the finance committee, if it would be helpful to you at all for the finance committee to try to meet on the 4th, because meeting on the same day as the school committee, it's not really like the finance committee can, be helpful in the process leading up to the presentation for the school committee.
I think that could be helpful. Perhaps we can try to figure out whether or not our standard 4 p.m. time next Thursday could work. And if it doesn't, we could find another time. It would need to be in addition to the meeting on the 11th, but the meeting on the 11th for warrants for payroll and payables could be quite quick.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay, so the public can look for a possible meeting on March 4th for the finance subcommittee. Great.
Right. And it may be worth also, because I asked Jake this kind of offline, but the March regular meeting on the 11th is when we'll discuss any conversation around reopening as well. Is that correct? Or further reopening?
Yes, I mean, everybody's, I assume folks are aware that, the commissioner very publicly said for elementary schools, looking for early April. I think April 5th is actually the date he used yesterday in a Zoom call I was on. Yes, so we will be talking about that. I'll talk about some ideas we have locally for approaching this. The Board of Education meeting, the Massachusetts Board of Education meeting that would actually codify this statement into law or into regulation that would really drive a must do this. I would suspect will be happening near the end of the first week of March or early into the second week of March. So ideally, we will have a fuller picture of the very specific language and expectations that are, by the time we meet again, will be codified into regulation and law. And in the meantime, we will continue to meet and discuss with the JLMC and with our problem-solving group.
Michelle?
So I just wanted to point out that March 4th, we just would want to work that meeting around the DESE is having a meeting with the PAC, I believe. So I just wouldn't want to coincide with that.
Do you know what time that meeting is, Michelle?
I think it's at 6 or 7. Hold on, I'll tell you. 7, according to the calendar.
So the meeting on the 4th would be at 4 o'clock. Does
Okay.
that work for you?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. I do not have any other business. So I am looking for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Michelle, moved.
Second.
Enthusiastically.
Steven seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call vote, please.
Bowen, aye.
Conry, aye.
Constantine, I.
Elfenbein, aye.
Green eye.
Johnson, enthusiastic eye.
Miller, semi-enthusiastically, aye.
Okay, thank you. It is 7:23 p.m. and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Speed round.
Yeah.
Thank you all.